The scripture reading today, the main one, comes from Genesis chapter 37. We'll start reading verse 1. Joseph sold into Egypt as a heading. Jacob settled in the land where his father had sojourned, the land of Canaan. This is a story of the family of Jacob. When Joseph was 17 years old, he was tending flocks with his brothers. He was an assistant to the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, and Joseph brought their father bad reports about them. Israel loved Joseph best of all of his sons, for he was the child of his old age, and he had made him a long, ornamented tunic. When his brothers saw that his father loved him best of all of his brothers, they hated him so much that they could not say a kind word to him. One day when his brothers had gone to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem, Israel said to Joseph, "Are your brothers not tending the flocks at Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them." "I am ready," Joseph answered. "Go then," he replied, "see if all is well with your brothers and the flocks, and bring back word." So he sent him off to the valley of Hebron. When Joseph reached Shechem, a man came upon him as he was wandering around in the fields. "What are you looking for?" the man asked. "I'm looking for my brothers," he answered. "Please tell me where they are tending their flocks." The man told him, "They've moved out from here. In fact, I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes that dreamer. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns here. We could say a wild beast devoured him. We will see then what comes of his dreams." But when Reuben heard this, he tried to save him from their hands, saying, "We must not take his life." Then Reuben said, "Don't shed his blood. Throw him into this cistern in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him." His purpose was to save him from their hands and restore him to their father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his tunic, the long ornamented tunic he had on. Then they took him and threw him in the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat. Looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, their camels laden with gum, balm, and resin to take down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What is to be gained by killing our brother and concealing his blood? Come, let us sell him to these Ishmaelites instead of doing away with him ourselves. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh." His brothers agreed. Midianite traders passed by, and they pulled Joseph out of the cistern. They sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. The Christian scripture reading is Matthew 14, verses 22 to 33. Then he made the disciples get into the boat and proceeded them to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. After doing so, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When it was evening, he was there alone. Meanwhile, the boat, already a few miles offshore, was being tossed about by waves, for the wind was against it. During the 4th watch of the night, he came toward them, walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. At once, Jesus spoke to them. "Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid." Peter said to him in reply, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." Peter got out of the boat and began to walk toward Jesus. But then he saw how strong the wind was, and became frightened. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, "Oh, you of little faith, why do you doubt?" After they got into the boat, the wind died down. Those who were in the boat did homage, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Today's sermon is titled, "A Little Embroidery." Martin Luther King Jr. gave a powerful speech. His famous speech, which some people refer to as the "I Have a Dream" speech, has a sentence that resonated with people since he gave the speech in 1963. "I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they'll be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." I think that speech helped to ensure that Martin Luther King Jr. was remembered in history books and in the hearts of Americans and the hearts of people around the world. Joseph's dreams resonated, and not in a good way. They resonated with those who heard the dreams. I think Joseph's dreams may have felt a bit disrespectful to his family and may have threatened the power structure of the family. Verses 5 to 11, which are not really a part of the Genesis reading for today, mention Joseph's dreams. Joseph, the family dreamer, had a dream where he and his brothers were making bundles of wheat. His brothers' bundles of wheat formed a circle around Joseph's bundle of wheat and bowed down to his bundle of wheat. Joseph had another dream where the sun, the moon, the stars all bowed down to Joseph. Needless to say, Joseph's brothers were angry. Even Joseph's father reprimanded him. Nobody likes the idea that they may need to bow down to someone, especially someone who historically had little power. In the case of a young family member. Joseph was also a tattletale, a trait that would not have endeared Joseph to his older brothers. And the cherry on the top, Joseph dressed, well, a bit weird. Eugene Peterson's The Message Bible says the coat was elaborately embroidered. There's another reason why Joseph's brothers hated him. Joseph might have dared to violate gender rules of how you dress. In other words, Joseph may have dressed like a female. Some scholars think the coat Joseph wore was worn by female children of royalty. Theologian Theodore Jennings Jr. said there are only 2 references in the Bible to this kind of coat, once here and once in reference to King David's daughter. Jennings continues, indicating the coat appears to have been a garment that was a mark of distinction for the virgin daughters of a king. The fact that Joseph's brothers are not dressed like Joseph supports the idea that Joseph was not dressed like men usually dressed. Joseph's brothers othered him, and that's often the first step toward rationalizing violence. Joseph's brothers see from a distance and say, "Here comes that dreamer." They didn't say, "Here comes our dreamer." The brothers say, "Here comes that dreamer." Then the brothers move from othering Joseph to treating Joseph as expendable in the worst way. Continuing their conversation about Joseph, they said, "Let's kill him." The coat of many colors narrative could be a case story, the role of bystanders in bullying and in violent crimes. Two of Jacob's brothers try to save him from being murdered. A clergy friend of mine sees Judah as a co-conspirator in Joseph being sold into slavery. Judah talked them into a modified plan where they don't kill Joseph, they just sell him as a slave. He said Judah profited from Joseph being sold into slavery. Bible commentary John Gibson thinks Reuben planned to rescue Joseph and to take Joseph home to their father. Reuben intervened twice to save Joseph, once in this week's readings. Reuben went back to the pit where Joseph was to rescue Joseph. When he got there, he didn't see Joseph. Reuben tore his clothes, possibly in grief. We get the sense that Reuben went along with the plan to tell their father that Joseph was killed by wild animals. I'm not a lawyer, but Reuben might, at minimum, be considered to be an accessory after the fact. The narrative could be a case study in what not to do when you're a bystander. Bystanders who are prepared to intervene directly or to call the authorities when there's a problem are in demand. Don Martin is a gay social media influencer. In a video on social media, he describes a few incidents of bullying he experienced in school. Martin says he experienced so much bullying that if administration gave all of the students who bullied him a detention, there might have been 5 kids who attended regular classes. I gather some people questioned his honesty because there were so many instances of bullying. You might remember seeing videos where a few police officers or maybe a teacher is filmed doing things or saying things that are just wrong. Because many of us carry cell phones with us that have built-in cameras, people in authority have been more frequently seen to be caught when they are doing things that are wrong. Martin says that because of cell phones, people are starting to realize that some of those authority figures we traditionally thought helped people and protected them may lie when they describe how they interact with members of minority groups. He correctly notes that teachers and police are just people, and that if they have not unlearned their internalized prejudices, they may act on those prejudices. Martin explains that stories of authority figures not intervening might not make much sense to people who are used to authority figures helping them. Sadly, authority figures not intervening for the powerless members of society is not a new thing. Reuben, the oldest brother in the Genesis reading, was an authority figure, but he did not effectively intervene to save Joseph. There's a common element in Jacob's narrative, in Joseph's narrative, and a narrative of Jesus walking on the water. Both stories contain fear. In the case of Joseph, the brothers fear losing status and power as the older brothers of Joseph. They may also be afraid of Joseph's feminine attire and mannerisms. In the gospel reading, the disciples are afraid when they see Jesus walking on the water. Then there is between these two stories an element that you might not immediately pick up. It's an element of fear, but there's another element. Both of the characters that are feared end up saving the lives of many people. In the case of Joseph, saving his family from famine. In the case of Jesus, saving humanity. I'm going to conclude with a quote by Buddhist Timber Hawkeye, and I hope it will help us when we are reacting out of fear. He says this: habitually contemplate whether your thoughts stem from love or from fear. If your thoughts originate in love, then follow them. But if they originate from a place of fear, then dig deep to find the root of your fear. Only then will you be able to finally let go of it, so that fear no longer limits your possibilities.